Good afternoon, everyone. Can everybody hear me? If you can, please type into the chat box. Hi, Angelica. All right, so we are going to go ahead and get started. We have a few more people that may be jumping on in a few minutes, but I am Amy Loudett. I am the Public Policy Associate with the National Network for Youth, and welcome to our 2016 National Summit on Youth Homelessness Hill Day Prep for Summit participants. There we go. So just a couple housekeeping and how to ask questions issues. We will only be taking written questions in the chat box over in the docking station to the right of your screen. So if you can type your questions into the chat box anytime during the presentation, and we will be sure to answer your question. Make sure to send your question to all so that it's public, and that way if somebody else has some expertise that we don't cover, then they can chime in via text box. And we will either respond by typing or we will answer your question over the phone when we break for questions. So a quick overview of today's topics. We are contacting your federal representatives, preparing for your visit, our specific policy asks for this year, including the fiscal year 2017 appropriations, Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, and Homeless Children and Youth Act, as well as to appropriately invite federal representatives and staff to visit your organizations back in your local districts, and then we'll do a little bit of follow-up. So with contacting your federal representatives, you want to make sure to determine who exactly you should be calling, and that's everyone in the United States has 2 senators and 1 representative for your district. If you work far from home, you may also be able to meet with your district's representative. So to find their names and numbers, you can consult a tool which is located in the slides if you download the slide presentation afterwards. If you already know their names, then you can search on the either the Senate website or the House of Representatives website and look for the 202 area code to contact them here in DC. Since we'll be in DC, you want to make sure that you're calling their DC office. You can call your offices directly. If you do not have the direct number, you can reach the U.S. representatives by calling 202-225-3121, or your U.S. senators by calling 202-224-3121. And there's an operator that will connect you to the individual office that you're looking for, which is great. Also, again, this information will be available in the slides after the presentation. When you're contacting your representative, go ahead and let them know that you're a constituent. It's always more beneficial to be a constituent and let them know that you are a voting member of their local district. And they are absolutely most eager to meet with their own constituents, so make sure to mention exactly where you're from. You want to tell the representatives or the staffers that you will be in Washington, D.C., and that you want to meet with your representative. As a constituent, you have the right to actually meet with the representative themselves. Communicate also that the purpose of the meeting is to discuss a local issue. Youth homelessness is local to the representative district as well as a national issue, and so we want to really drive home that this is happening in their home districts as well. That representative is responsible for issues that directly affect constituents, including homelessness. And then finally, if your representative isn't available on the day that you've requested, which will be March 15th, if your representative is not available then ask to meet with the aide who handles youth homelessness policy. These staffers are responsible for the majority of the work in your congressional representative's office, and most constituents meet with a legislative aide, but try to get a hold of the chief of staff or the legislative director if you can. So when preparing for your visit, you want to make sure that you're coordinating your visits with others from your state. We can, once you get here, you'll be able to tell who's there from your area, and you want to make sure that you partner with them so that you guys are spreading the work and making sure that your messaging is all on point and collaborative. You can also email us to ask to be connected to other participants from your state, and you'll see that the email us is hyperlinked on the screen right now. So again, once you access these slides after the presentation, you'll be able to access that email address. Come prepared with your talking points. Know exactly what points you really want to communicate, especially if you are coordinating with other people from your state. There may be a point that you are far more knowledgeable of and can speak to much more concisely, and so you want to be able to really hone in on those points yourself. Be prepared with examples or data to underscore your points. Right now we're moving into a data age, and so it's really important to not only have those stories that bring a face to the issue for your representative, but also the data to really back that story up and say this isn't just a one-time thing. So bring your program information for the programs that you run in your home districts and any research that you have published. So once you're at the meeting, what you are going to want to be sure to communicate. First of all, thank them for meeting with you. They're really busy and like to feel important, so thanking them always helps. You want to start off the meeting on the right note and really kind of feed the ego, if you will. Note your expertise. Be sure that you mention that the professional experience that you have on the issue of youth homelessness is crucial to their understanding. It'll help you establish your credibility and your organizations. So discuss your organization on that note. Why was it created? How does it fulfill the needs of runaway and homeless youth in your community? Make sure to reference the following points specifically: that throughout the country, homelessness results in crises for youth and families. We have programs that prevent or otherwise address homelessness and therefore mitigate these crises. However, the solutions are not scaled to the capacity because of the lack of current resources. As a result, youth and families continue to suffer unnecessarily. And in order to interrupt this cycle, the lawmaker must act now. Again, those talking points will be available in the notes under the slides afterwards. Explain the local issue. This is really, really important. You want to be able to bring how it's happening in their own backyard to them. Why is it an important issue for them to listen to? Because it's affecting all of their constituents. So do you have any data on the number of unaccompanied homeless youth? You can use educational data. Do you have data on how many youth you turn away from housing and services each year due to a lack of available resources? And how does the work of your organization benefit your local community? Explain the value in a practical way. You want to make your points using data or stories. Remember that the points that you are making should be directly linked to your policy asks. For every quote-unquote point or issue that you raise, you should propose a solution that a member of Congress can actually help to move forward. For example, for a member of Congress, an ask for a specific funding amount for a program or co-sponsor bill, or to co-sponsor a bill, etc. Clearly articulate your asks. Be specific about what you want your U.S. representative to do. The next several slides will provide you with extensive background information about the policy asks we ask you to make. Also be sure to pick up the fact sheets that we are preparing for each of you about each of these asks. Invite the U.S. representative to visit your program. Like anyone else, lawmakers learn and benefit from firsthand experiences. Therefore, you should kindly encourage your elected official or their staff to visit your organization and meet the young people it serves. To avoid interfering with his or her legislative responsibilities, you want to check Senate and House calendars to see when Congress is out of session, and those links to the calendars are also in the notes under the slides available after the presentation. Then, when lawmakers are usually back at home and most willing to visit organizations in the community, remember that this is an opportunity for your congressman to show solidarity with constituents and remind them of that as well. Thank them for the meeting at the closing. They took the time to meet with you and listen to you. Let them know that you're grateful for that time. Also, let them know that you will be following up with them about what you discussed together. You want to ask for business cards, absolutely. Whether it's the legislative aide or the representatives themselves, in order to email thank yous and follow-ups after the meeting with further information, then you really need to get those. And also bring business cards with you when you arrive. A lot of staffers in the front offices will ask you for your business card just to streamline the process of getting everybody into the meeting. So as far as follow-up, what do you want to include in that follow-up? It's all about relationships, right? So do exactly what you would do when you want to develop or strengthen a relationship with someone. You communicate. So send an email to everyone you met with, send one email per congressional office, and include everyone you met in that email. It's important to remind them about your conversation and the context, and to get your email contact information in their inboxes. You never know when a congressional staff person will need some quick information from you when they're working on something and will search their inbox for youth homelessness. You want your name to pop up. This has happened to us many times. Follow up with any information that you said you would in your meeting. So take notes and make sure that you are clear on your own next steps. Invite the U.S. representative and their staff to visit your program again. Include specific potential dates, either around an event at your program or in generally August when Congress will be in recess. Again, it's all about those relationships, and it's best to build relationships face-to-face. Politicians want to look good in the public eye, so being present at an event at your local program where there's press, or having a member of Congress visit your program where press will be invited along with the public, will help make the member of Congress have a good public image, and it'll help you continue to strengthen and build that relationship. So remind your representative or their staff of your asks and urge them to take the actions that you articulated in your meeting. When someone commits to you in a meeting, it's not necessarily what they're actually going to do. There's a lot of noise and tugging and pulling in D.C. The most effective advocacy reminds congressional offices about what they said they were going to do and checks in occasionally to ask if they did it or where they are in the process of getting it done. Thank them again for the meeting in your follow-up email, and be grateful. Being grateful goes a really long way in relationship building, especially here in Washington. Sometimes we thank people for doing something even before they do it as a tactic to get them to do it. So for our policy ask number 1, fiscal year 2017 appropriations funding, I'm going to hand the screen over to our very own Darla Bardine.
Thank you, Amy. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining for this prep webinar. So now what we're going to cover, so for our Hill Day, there will be 3 separate fact sheets to cover the 3 different topics that folks will be able to pick up and have both for talking points for you, but also handouts to leave with all the congressional offices that you meet with. So make sure that you pick up enough fact sheets to hand out for each office visit. And we have three distinct policy asks or issues that that are going to be included in the Hill Day. And so the first one has to do with FY 2017 funding. The second one is the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, and then the third one is the Homeless Children and Youth Act. So right now we're gonna I'm gonna go through Policy Ask 1, FY17 funding. So by way of background for you all so that you can understand the context for what our asks are and what we're asking you to push for in your meetings is that the budget caps were lifted for FY16 and 17 at the same time. So that means there's, just like there was more money on the table for FY16, that same amount of money is on the table for FY17. So there's more funding for domestic and defense spending. And the budget caps were lifted last year, and so that means there isn't, going to be a debate like there was last year about what is the overall spending level going to be for the federal government. That has already been predetermined. So really the work that's going on now is how much will each subcommittee have to spend of that overall money, and then the next step is, so for each committee, how much will each program get in each subcommittee based on how much total funding they have. So the president's budget was released in early February, so that's out there. So that really kind of kicks off the budget process. But Congress, our understanding is Congress is working on the budget even before the president released his budget in early February. So Congress is already starting to determine what appropriation levels there are going to be for both subcommittees and individual programs. And also, as I think everybody is aware, even people not following politics, the presidential election is, this is election year. So because it's election year, Congress is not working as much. And it's also a lame duck Congress because it's the last year of an administration, and, it's going to be a new administration no matter who it is. So there's just less time to get stuff done. There could be, a continuing resolution and then like a full spending bill towards the end of the year. There's just a lot of different scenarios of how it could play out. But that's kind of the political reality for where we are currently. So based on the background and the fact that the overall spending level of Congress has already been set, we don't need to make requests for, set the overall spending budget at X, right? That has already been done. So we have two specific requests. So when you're meeting with your member of Congress, and, you're talking to them about how important these programs are, and we have talking points later on, they want to know specifically what do you want them to do, right? Members of Congress don't want to meet with you just to meet with you. And we don't want you to meet with members of Congress just to meet with them. We want you to ask them to do something that they actually have the power and ability to do. So I put in quotes here as something that you can actually say. So to your member of Congress or their staff, in your personal letter to the Appropriations Committee, we wouldn't necessarily say request the following, but request $165 million for the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act program, which, as I think most people on this phone know, is administered by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Also, please request $85 million for the Education for Homeless Children and Youth program, which is administered by the U.S. Department of Education, and appropriate $33 million to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development so that there can be youth demonstration projects through the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Program. So those are the three kind of funding number requests. And what a personal, just by way of background, so every member of Congress that is not on the Appropriations Committee sends a letter to the Appropriations Committee asking for funding for specific things. So it's their personal letter because it's a letter from a member of Congress to the Appropriations Committee. And this happens in both the Senate and the House, so it doesn't matter, you know, if you're meeting with a representative or a senator. This is your ask. And so what you're asking them to do is include these funding level requests in their personal letters. So obviously the more personal letters that include these specific number amount funding requests, it's a higher likelihood that these programs will get the funding that we're requesting. So if they're not, and I should say, so if they are a member of the Appropriations Committee, then they may not send a letter to the Appropriations Committee, but because they're a member of the Appropriations Committee, they actually have a lot of power over how much funding will get set for each program. So if they are a member of the Appropriations Committee, you can ask them to push for these specific funding levels as an Appropriations Committee member. And again, it's the same ask whether you're meeting with Senate or House representatives. So the second specific request relating to fiscal year 17 funding is you want to ask every member of Congress to sign on to the Dear Colleague letter supporting these requests. So myself and NACI and True Colors Fund have been working with our House and Senate champions to write letters. And these are letters written by members of Congress and circulated to other members of Congress. And they're asking other members of Congress to sign on to support the funding request in the letter. So these letters include asking for increased funding. Well, they don't always say increase, but like maybe they'll say robust funding, or maybe they'll have the specific funding amount. It's really what's ever been negotiated. And we work really hard to make sure our Dear Colleague letters are bipartisan. So we always have a Democrat and a Republican leader of these letters in both the Senate and the House. And so what you're asking is the members of Congress that you meet with to sign on to the Dear Colleague letters that support these requests. So this is another effective way. The more members of Congress that sign on to a letter supporting funding and increased funding for these programs, the more likely it is that there will be increased resources allocated to the programs that we really care about. So the House letter is finalized and is already circulating. I think we have 12 members of Congress that have signed on. Obviously, there's a lot more members of Congress in the House side than there is in the Senate, and so we really want to see a lot more members of Congress signing on to that Dear Colleague letter. You don't need to like write down or memorize like the names of the staffers and their email addresses, because in the fact sheets that we provide for you at the summit, we're going to have the contact information on there for the House. And then for the Senate letter isn't finalized yet, so we're not putting out staff contact information until it's final, although we do know who the staff is because we've been working with them. And so when you're meeting with a member of Congress, they're going to want this detailed information. They're going to want to know who they contact, what their phone number is. You want to make it as easy as possible for members of Congress to do what you're asking them to do. So if they have to track down, well, what Dear Colleague is this, who's leading it, then they're most likely not going to do anything. So you need to give them all the information they need so that they can take action. So those are the specific requests. And we've put together talking points for each of the requests. And these talking points are reflected often in the fact sheets, but also in the Dear Colleague letters and in the different letters that we have put together for advocates to download and use and edit and put on letterhead. So for the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, we're asking for $165 million. And the talking points are, $165 million is the last specified funding amount for the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, and that was in the 2008 reauthorization. The Runaway and Homeless Youth Act program is the only targeted program providing youth-specific housing and services and resources to communities to serve youth experiencing homelessness. Another good talking point is that these programs are on the front lines preventing and serving victims of human trafficking. And also these programs prevent young people from abusing substances, including heroin and opioids, as well as referring youth to substance abuse intervention programs. Heroin and opioid addiction is a huge, huge talking point right now in Congress. You know, there's a big sea change in kind of how people are thinking about the response, the appropriate response to substance abuse and drug addiction. So some of our champions thought that it would be really important for us to highlight the connection and the really important work that these programs are doing on the front lines in terms of addressing what is really being talked about and seen as a substance abuse addiction crisis within Congress, and it could help us. In terms of the Education for Homeless Children and Youth Act program, we're asking for $85 million. $85 million is how much money this program is currently authorized at, and it was recently reauthorized, and it is now enacted law, and it was codified in law in the Every Student Succeeds Act. Also, $85 million was included in the president's budget, so that's how much the president asked for. That's a really good talking point, especially when you're meeting with Democratic members of Congress. And then in terms of like numbers and data to really illustrate the need for the increased funding, is that in the 2013-2014 school year, public schools identified a record number of homeless children and youth, over 1.3 million. And this is a 7% increase from the previous year and is a 100% increase since the recession, since the 2006-2007 school year. So numbers talk and are really persuasive. And so again, we'll have that data in the fact sheet, but they're really salient talking points and can really get members of Congress and staff to take your requests seriously. So the other talking point, the $33 million for HUD to do youth demonstration projects. So $33 million was included for the same purpose in the FY16 omnibus. The president requested $25 million, but we want to keep it at $33 million. And so the talking points are, you know, what you all know. Youth need a continuum of housing and services that's relevant to their developmental stages and distinct to their needs as young people and developing adults. And so this funding would give HUD the incentive to fund youth-appropriate housing and services by allowing communities to be creative and flexible in the ways in which they address youth homelessness. And you can always give specific examples of kind of some of the challenges that there are now with HUD funding. You can give examples about, you know, how your local McKinney-Vento liaison doesn't have the capacity or the resources to provide young people experiencing homelessness with what they need. You can also talk about, if you have a Runaway and Homeless Youth Act grant, how effective your program is, how many young people you turn away from housing and services every year just because you lack capacity, and that if there were more resources and you had more resources, you could help more young people. You could prevent things from happening to them. So you can always make the connections to these talking points to what you are doing, what your program is doing in your community, and what you're seeing is the reality in terms of the need regarding youth homelessness in your community. So moving on to our second policy ask, you'll have a separate fact sheet about the reauthorization of the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act. So I think most of you probably know this background and this information, so I'm going to go through it a bit more quickly than the appropriations. But so the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act technically expired in 2013, so that just means that it needs to be reauthorized and updated. And there is a Senate and a House bill that are pretty identical. There's a little bit of a difference, but they're very nearly the same bill. So S262 was introduced by Senators Leahy, Collins, Ayotte, and Booker in January 2015. So this is a bipartisan bill. It currently has 33 co-sponsors, And the House version is HR 1779. It was introduced in April of last year. It is also bipartisan. It was introduced by Representative Riker and Representative Yarmouth. And it currently has 32 co-sponsors. So the name of the legislation is the Runaway and Homeless Youth and Trafficking Prevention Act. And so the specific request in terms of when you're meeting with members of Congress is one, to just tell them how important the program is, which you will have already told them about the program as part of your appropriations ask and conversation. So you can let them know that there is a bill that would reauthorize the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, that it does need reauthorized, that the legislation is bipartisan and bicameral. And so you're asking them to become a co-sponsor. So to sign on as endorsing and supporting the legislation, that's what a co-sponsor is. And you also want to ask them if there's another vote on the Runaway and Homeless Youth and Trafficking Prevention Act, that they vote in favor of it. And if the conversation is going really, really well, you can say, look, we need to get another vote on this bill. So if there's anything you can do to help us bring this bill for another vote, that would be really helpful. So if you're really feeling the love in the meeting, you can definitely put that out there. And just so you know, I don't want you to ask a member of Congress to become a co-sponsor if they're already a co-sponsor. So this slide shows all of the current Senate co-sponsors. And so I put R means Republican, and then I abbreviated the state that they're from, so you can quickly scan through and see if you see your state on here. And then I means independent and D means Democratic. So we have 2 Republican co-sponsors, 1 independent, and then 30 Democratic co-sponsors. So if you're meeting with somebody that is already a co-sponsor, you thank them for co-sponsorship, you tell them how important the legislation is, and you just and ask them, is there, if there's anything you can do to help move this bill forward and bring it to a vote, we would really appreciate any assistance that you can provide, and let us know how we can help. And so for your House meetings, this is, again, we have 32 co-sponsors. So here I put everybody on here, same abbreviations. We have 2 Republicans and then 30 Democratic co-sponsors. And it's different here. The states won't tell you necessarily if they're your representative or not. So like Amy had said at the beginning, if you don't know who your congressperson is, who your House of Representatives representative is, you can go online and use that tool, and we'll make sure to follow up with the link to that tool so that you can put in your address or zip code and figure out exactly who your member of Congress is, so you'll know if they're already a co-sponsor or not. So just quickly, you all probably know talking points better than I do, but some of the key updates. So part of what is a carrot to members of Congress is that we need to reauthorize this program because there's some important updates that we need to make. That there are some things in the current law that make the program not work as well as it could, and the program could be better if it was reauthorized. So those are key updates, because if there isn't a need to update or change the program, then there's really is no incentive for Congress to do anything, especially this Congress, because they're not as concerned about discretionary programs like this continuing to get funding. That's just not a carrot in this current political climate and the fiscal climate that we're in currently. So definitely talking about there's some really important updates that we just need to make, and it'll make this great program even better. So some of the key updates, there are some new provisions to combat human trafficking and discrimination. There's a non-discrimination clause. It also would increase the length of stay in basic center programs from 21 to 30 days. Of course, it's voluntary. And it would require Runaway and Homeless Youth Act grantees to assist youth in completing the FAFSA. And another talking point, these programs are just vital to scaling up a youth-centric community response to youth homelessness. So you can talk about, how important it is to help young people fill out the FAFSA, get to college, how some of the young people you serve just need a little more than 21 days. And by providing a few more days, you're actually, more efficiently using the resources because you could have better outcomes. And definitely talking about how you all are preventing human trafficking by providing housing and services to these very vulnerable young people. And so all of these, and also about how RHYA programs are just youth-centric and youth-appropriate. And if we really are going to work to prevent, reduce, and end youth homelessness, these are the programs that need to be scaled up so that we're providing young people with what they need when they need it. So that is the second policy ask, and now I am going to turn it back over to our very own Amy Laudit to go over our third policy ask.
Hello again, everyone. So for policy ask number 3, we have the Homeless Children and Youth Act on our plate. So currently, a little bit of a background on this bill. It is bipartisan and bicameral, meaning that it has both Republican and Democratic supporters, co-sponsors, as well as being introduced in both the House and the U.S. Senate, which is really exciting, makes it much more easy to sign on to when you have that type of support. It has been so far supported by 413 organizations, including 61 national organizations, and that number is rising constantly. Excuse me. We also have in this act and that it amends HUD's definition of homelessness to include children and youth that have been verified as homeless by local educational agency liaisons through the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Act, programs, Runaway and Homeless Youth Act programs, Head Start, Healthcare for the Homeless, etc. Pretty much anyone who has an overall definition of homelessness that may not fit in line with HUD's, it'll make all of that streamlined. It prohibits HUD from prioritizing one group over another, so it really gives that power back to the community and allowing the community to say, this is what our local needs actually are. It also requires data from all federal homeless youth programs to be a part of the annual homelessness assessment report that HUD gives to Congress every year. It does not contain, so here are the things that it does not do. It does not contain expensive new studies or data collection. These federal agencies are already collecting this data, and so it's really not an additional ask. It's just let's put it all in one place and make sure that it's being included so that we have a full picture of what's going on. It does not take away funding from services for other less needy homeless populations or people who are chronically homeless. And we know that it doesn't do this because, like I was saying, it gives that power back to the community to be able to say, this is what our local community need is. It also does not flood the system and overwhelm existing resources. As long as those local communities are doing those assessments in an appropriate way, there's no need for a flooding of the system. So did somebody else just come in? So for the specific requests, you've got the co-sponsors. You're going to ask for co-sponsors for the Homeless Children and Youth Act. Those are the bill numbers. Once we have this uploaded for you to access after the webinar is closed, you'll be able to actually click on those links and be able to see the bill text. So just like Darla was doing with the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, of course you don't need to memorize this information, but it's good for you to know what current House co-sponsors the Homeless Children and Youth Act already has. So here's a list of all of those Democrats and Republicans that have already signed on as co-sponsors from the House. And here's the list from the Senate. So as you can see, being early in the year, we're still working on getting a lot of those co-sponsors. So it's going to be really crucial for you guys to be able to help in making that happen. So for talking points, you really want to be able to explain the HUD definition and eligibility barrier that won't exist anymore because youth will be eligible to be served in runaway and homeless youth programs. The youth that wouldn't be eligible to be served in runaway and homeless youth programs would be eligible for HUD and vice versa. Allowing those Runaway and Homeless Youth Act funded programs to sign off and verify is another huge bonus for the youth that we serve, especially in the transitional age youth category. So HUD can't impose their priorities if it does not meet the local needs assessment. So again, really bringing that power back to the community and allowing the local communities to say this is what's crucial for us. And so at this point, that is our 3 policy asks. So we've gone through the setting up your meeting, what to talk about in your meeting, how to follow up with your meeting, as well as our 3 policy asks. And at this point, I would like to turn the mic over to our good friend Ted from the Night Ministry and have him take you through whether any of you have any parting advice. So Ted, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Perfect.
So I think what you said about building relationships is really critical. I think time and time again, you're going to find that the person that you meet with may be with the staff member for a short amount of time, but may be there for several years and may move to another office that you work with. So it's critical to kind of build those relationships during these meetings. And if you make them seem like they're an expert to their boss and they get some recognition for that, they're going to keep coming back to you for assistance. So I think that that's a really good point. One thing I do want to ask is if you have any suggestions for if somebody gets a no, because I'm pretty lucky being in Chicago. The people we work with are fairly open to and supportive of these kinds of policies. But what about if somebody says no?
You've all been unmuted, so feel free to speak. And if you don't want to speak, if you can put your phone on mute, please. Thank you. Well, it seems like nobody has any final parting advice.
Carla, I have one other question. Are you going to have forms for people to fill out, report back forms to give to you guys, or do you want us to tell you? Is there going to be a process for that?
Yes. So actually, this year we're going to have 2 different ways for people to provide us with who they met with, who all was included in the meeting, like if you have other NN4Y members or youth advisors with you at the meetings, which members of Congress you met with, what topics you discussed, if any agreements were made, and what follow-up you need to do or plan to do. And so we're going to have both a printed out piece of paper that you can just fill in and turn back into us or email to us later. But also, we have a new conference app, and you'll be able to, from the app, fill out an online form, a fillable form, and provide us with the same information. And then just submit it, and then we can do it electronically. So you can either do electronically or handwritten, and again, we'll want you to do a report back form, either electronically or handwritten, for each meeting that you attend. So separate forms for each meeting, and that is something that we have added this year. And so that will have there'll be a sign about all of the Hill meeting visits where you can pick up the fact sheets to hand out, and then the Hill report back forms, and it'll all also be on the app, so you'll be able to pull up the fact sheets and the form on the app, but obviously you'll need the printed out versions to leave with the members of Congress.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you. Does anybody have any other questions? All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you all in 2 weeks. I think this time in 2 weeks we will be nearly done with day 1 of our summit, and you'll be grabbing all of these fact sheets off our table to get ready for your Hill meetings the next day. So please email us if you have any questions or think of anything, and we look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you.